time for our post-fight recap of what was the big fight in Land Down Under, Jeff Horn versus Tszyu. We'll start off with a standout performance from veteran Shannon O'Connell. Shotgun Shannon. Very much the shotgun in this fight against what was then the unbeaten Kylie Fulmer. And almost immediately, you got the sense that this was one step up too much for Kylie. Too much, too soon in Shannon O'Connell. A veteran of 9 years, close to a decade, with the kind of professional experience and understanding of distance and spacing that poor Kylie just doesn't have yet, as distance and spacing had a lot to do with why this fight looked the way that it did. Put simply, Shannon just knows her range better than Kylie, as Shannon has been out there a lot more times than Kylie has. In those few moments where Kylie tried to get something going, tried to come forward on Shannon, you'd see Shannon take a half step back and fire off some straight shots, effectively walking Kylie into those shots and hurting her, causing visible damage. When that wasn't going on, Shotgun Shannon was painting the town red and painting Kylie Fulmer's face.
Pure domination.
There's just no other way to put it. There's not much to break down, not much to mull over here. Shannon O'Connell dominated Kylie Fulmer from the opening bell to the time she stopped her in the 7th. And the real takeaway here is that any up-and-comer, any unbeaten contender in the super bantamweight division, where Shannon is currently campaigning, if they should ever find themselves so confronted with Shannon O'Connell, don't let her age fool you, or her professional record. She's got a couple of losses. She's been in there with a lot of good fighters like Helen Joseph, good fighters like Hyun Mi Choi,
and Marcela Acuña.
When you're facing some of the best and brightest fighters around, these things happen. So perhaps Shannon might not be able to win a world title from the upper echelon fighters, the 4 world champions at this weight, but any of these unbeaten contenders looking to make names for themselves, they must tread carefully with Shannon, as Shannon is no stranger to taking an unbeaten fighter's... Oh, Kylie Fulmer was just the latest. Shannon O'Connell has dished out the first professional losses to 7 unbeaten fighters throughout her professional career, which spans something like 9 years, close to 10 now. This is the second unbeaten fighter that Shannon O'Connell has fought in a row. She won a split decision in her last fight against the unbeaten Bianca Elmire, and we see what she just did to the then unbeaten Kylie Fulmer. Congratulations to Shannon O'Connell on a standout performance from a seasoned veteran. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. Let's get down to the meat and potatoes of the thing. Let's get down to this main event. What was Tszyu, the son of Tszyu, his big step up against one of the biggest, if not the biggest name in Australian boxing, the Land Down Under. Talking about Jeff the Hornet Horn. Leading up to this fight, I couldn't make up my mind. I really couldn't.
Rode the fence.
I didn't know if this was going to be too much too soon for Tim, the way, Shannon was too much too soon for Kylie, or if, Tim's polished boxing would see him through this fight with a much more experienced guy on the world stage than himself, Jeff Horn.
I couldn't make up my mind.
But I'll tell you something. Tim seems like a guy who's determined to step out of his father's shadow. That he's not just the son of Tszyu, he's Tszyu, and he's his own man. Basically said as much post-fight. So many words. He asserted that he is his own man, though in watching him in action as he dominated Jeff Horn from start to finish, all I could think to myself was that the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
He's his father's son.
This ain't one of those. This ain't Marvis Frazier, the son of Joe Frazier, and this certainly ain't Chavez Jr., Chavez Sr. Comes to that guy, it looks like the apple fell pretty far from the tree, then somebody picked it up and threw it into the neighbor's yard. When it comes to Tim, unlike the aforementioned father and son duos, not only does he bear a striking resemblance to his father, he's almost his spitting image, but his implementation, his poise, his steely gaze, usage of the lead hand to set up the straight.
It's like watching Tszyu out there.
I'm sure that those parallels are going to annoy the fuck out of Tim as his career progresses, because he is trying to distance himself from his father's name. He is trying to stand on his own 2 feet and be his own man. That he's not Kostya, he's Tim. Tell you what, regardless of retrospects and parallels to his old man, Tim really made a statement against Jeff Horn. He really did. Leading up to this thing, I just couldn't decide. I couldn't. So Tim, He made the decision for me.
And for everyone else.
Including Jeff, who is world-renowned for being a rough and rugged competitor, a tough bastard.
And he showed that toughness.
Just not much else. It seems that Tszyu very much had his number. Tim didn't seem the least bit bothered by Jeff Horn's constant attempts to crowd him and smother his work. And these attempts to crowd Tim and smother his work were as a result of Jeff Horn's inability to deal with Tszyu's power and clean punching, long range and mid-range. Tszyu always got the better of the exchange, if there even was an exchange, as a good number of the time, Tim was just teeing off on Jeff. Which point, all Jeff could resort to was collapsing the pocket and falling in, diving into a clinch. Referee Phil Austin had enough of that crap early. Let those guys know, hey, this is a boxing match, all right?
Nix the grab-assin'.
The body work of Tszyu was quite striking as well. I mean, how many times did we see Tim hurt Jeff to the body? I have some questions about the condition of Jeff Horn ahead of this fight. His voice was noticeably hoarse, raspy. You wonder that he wasn't ill going into this fight and he just chose not to make any light of it as to not diminish Tim's very dominant victory. Better still, those body shots were really getting to Jeff.
He was downed 2 times.
The aesthetic of the fight was quite scrappy, quite messy in the beginning stages of it, but very quickly, Tszyu established dominance with poise, with control, good distance, good spacing, good footing, you know. For all of Jeff Horn's attempts to lunge in and make this a barroom brawl, Tszyu never really lost his footing.
Wasn't bothered at all by it.
And this is the first time we've seen any semblance of a large audience, a large crowd, at a boxing match since the pandemic started. With that, this leaves a lasting impression on not just the Australian boxing fans in the land down under, but anybody who took stock of this match, got up early here stateside like I did, and had some boxing for breakfast. Tszyu has the look of what could be a superstar. Knocks one with a big hook in the thigh, forces him to take a knee in the 6th, and ultimately continues to punish him until, Jeff is just incapacitated, and they've got to stop this thing. And this is the tough-as-nails Jeff Horn that went the distance with Manny Pacquiao, where everybody thought this guy was just cannon fodder. This is the same Jeff Horn that managed to avenge the loss to the very tough, very durable Michael Zarafa in their second fight, and summoned a punch straight from the devil's ass.
He just couldn't do nothing with Tim.
It's very striking how much control Tim had over the distance at which the fight was being fought at only 25 years old, 16-0 now. The torch has been passed, and Australia has a new superstar. It has its new face of boxing in the land down under. It was just a sensational showing for Tim. He has arrived, and I can think of 1 or 2 to maybe even 3 potential matchups with some matchroom fighters, I might add, that make a lot of sense for Tim moving forward. Though here and now, the most I can say is congratulations to Tszyu for putting on one of the more dominant performances in a step-up fight I've seen in recent memory. I just didn't think it was going to be this one-sided. In heavyweight news, Frank Warren took to Twitter and said, "Good morning, Dillian. It's Wednesday in case you've missed a few days. I don't want to sound negative, but I'm positive Daniel and Joe would do exactly the same to you. Hashtag Dubois Snyders. Saturday, 7 p.m., BT Sport 1. A post from IFL TV on Twitter reads, Frank Warren was left unhappy as he lays into Barry Hearn over a recent interview Barry did and urges Eddie Hearn for a meeting ASAP to discuss potential Queensberry versus Matchroom fights. To which Barry Hearn replied, "Good old Frank, always looking out for the fans, not himself. Believe that and you'll believe anything. Some great fights to make for sure, and I will be delighted to see them on Sky Sports, our exclusive UK partner." To which Frank Warren replied, "Why so negative, Baza? BT are keen to explore the idea of working for the good of the sport, and apparently so is Adam Smith and your son. If you want to join for lunch as well, the Stellas are on me." To which Barry Hearn replied, "Thanks for the offer, but I will pass. Eddie's the man, so enjoy your chat." Let's just cut through the crap here. We already know that Dillian Whyte is spoken for, and we already know what Dillian Whyte is going to be doing in the very near future. He's going to be having a rematch, a second fight with Alexander Povetkin before the year is out. So any proposition of Dillian going on some excursion to fight Daniel Dubois
For what?
is farce, and much ado about nothing. I will say that Frank didn't wait until Dillian Whyte was stopped by Alexander Povetkin to make this proposition. He has been making this proposition for some time, however unrealistic it might have seemed at the time. And that gives me the impression that what he's been doing is attempting to make the name of Dillian Whyte synonymous with one of his boys, as to feed off the synergy
Clout chase.
that creates and feed off of what is the bigger marquee fighter's name, the bigger marquee fighter in that scenario being Dillian Whyte. Daniel Dubois shows a lot of promise, and maybe he could become the heir apparent to the heavyweight division over there in the United Kingdom. Maybe, but it's too soon to tell. He doesn't have those characteristics, those perks here and now, and what Frank Warren is hoping to do is get him to those perks by clout chasing Dillian Whyte, the name of Dillian Whyte. I question whether or not that Daniel Dubois versus Joe Joyce fight will become a reality when Frank Warren is sitting here today making the proposition that either one of those two guys should fight Dillian Whyte.
Aren't they supposed to be fighting each other?
What we're just saying is that you want one of those guys or both of those guys to fight Dillian Whyte. Well, what happened to them fighting each other? Are you using the shockwaves from last weekend's card, last weekend's fight, to help promote a card that otherwise wouldn't get any attention? This Daniel Dubois versus Snyder fight?
Looks like it.
I don't know that this Queensberry versus Matchroom proposition will actually become a thing, as both promotional outfits have network commitments to their respective network affiliates. And for the most part, while Queensberry would stand to benefit from having access to some of the Matchroom's stable of fighters, the same can't be said in reverse.
Not really.
Queensberry doesn't have anything that Matchroom needs. What do you think? Eddie Hearn is losing sleep that he can't get Anthony Yard or Archie Sharp on a card? Is that what you think is going on? If we're going to be honest and we're going to be objective here, Frank needs this partnership, this relationship to be formed a lot more than Eddie does. It's the funniest thing, because where Frank Warren is proposing that Daniel Dubois get to fight Dillian Whyte, who he knows is spoken for, he's making no light of Eddie Hearn's proposition that same Daniel Dubois lock horns with Philippe Hergovic. I mean, if you really want to do a cross-promotional, cross-network fight with a Matchroom fighter, that guy's available. He ain't spoken for.
There's really no sense in calling out Dillian Whyte.
You've got Martin Bacoli, Alan Babic, Philippe Hergovic.
You still interested, Frank?
You want to throw a little something together? You want to put on a card? People over there at Matchroom? Those guys versus some of your guys? Is that what you want to do? Or is it just about Dillian? Is that the only Matchroom guy that you want to do any business with? What is it? I'll tell you what. We're going to find out. And finally, Danny Garcia, head of this fall's Errol Spence fight, Errol Spence pay-per-view matchup, is saying 2 more fights, then he's going up to 154 pounds, and that the Errol Spence fight is really about who wants it more. These are just my thoughts. I don't think that the Errol Spence fight is necessarily about who wants it more so much as what is the actual condition of Errol Spence, as this will be the first time we've seen him since the car accident. If that fight is about anything, it's about that. I mean, I think that's the main selling point for the match. Assessing Errol Spence's current condition and whether or not he's the same guy he was before he flipped that Ferrari.
That's the sizzle.
That's the intrigue, and for many people, that's Danny Garcia's only out to win this fight. If Errol Spence has been so rendered damaged goods as a result of the car accident, that then makes it possible for the fight to perhaps be competitive and perhaps for Danny Garcia to win this thing. You envision a scenario to where maybe Danny upsets the plans for Errol. Maybe he takes that guy's O and takes his 2 world titles. I could see that being turned into a 2-fight engagement. And those 2 fights could be Danny's final fights as a welterweight. The 2 fights that he's talking about. The 2 fights he means to have before he moves up to the junior middleweight division. The proposition of Danny Garcia moving up to 154 pounds. 2 fights. I just don't think that division's going to be kind to him. I don't. I just saw Danny Garcia fail to stop Ivan Redkach. The same Ivan Redkach that was stopped by John Molina. The same Ivan Redkach that was stopped by Dejan Zlatijanin. And all of that took place below welterweight. At welterweight, Danny couldn't stop that guy. So what kind of punching power is going to carry over to 154 when you can't stop a guy who's been stopped below 147. Could you imagine Danny Garcia as economic and slow-footed as he is, going in there with a Tony Harrison, a Jarrett Hurd, an Arislandi Lara,
Brian Castano,
Sebastian Fundora, the towering inferno that would very much tower over the smaller Danny Garcia. I mean, Danny's not a big welterweight, so just imagine what he's going to look like next to these super welterweights, what are junior middleweights. I mean, what are we talking about here? Danny Garcia versus Jermel Charlo. Is that what we're talking about?
Jason Rosario.
I'm thinking, if Danny Garcia ends up moving up to 154 in 2 fights, his maiden voyage there is going to have to be against guys like, I don't know, Dennis Hogan, Brandon Adams. Super welters that really ain't all that super. Guys that, they're maybe beefy guys for that weight, but they're not all that statuesque. They're not long and rangy.
Because Danny's not a big guy.
And Danny's not a busy guy either. Danny has a strong punch at 147 and good counters, but that works at 147. 154 is a whole different kettle of fish, and you don't have the output, the work rate, to keep some of these bigger guys off. So I imagine that in his maiden voyage to that division, he's not going to be dealing with those bigger guys. And in order for this scenario to come into fruition, Danny would have to beat Errol Spence, I would say, beat him in his next fight, and then, I don't know, maybe Errol runs it back with him and wins the rematch. Though if it happens that way, that pretty much takes all the fire out of a Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford unification match, as Danny will have beaten Terrence Crawford to the punch. Rather, Terrence Crawford will have been frozen out of the division, allowing Danny Garcia to beat him to the punch. Either way, that would kind of fuck up that fight, wouldn't it? I mean, you can still make the fight even if the guy takes a loss. It's just not going to have that same air of intrigue, you understand. So you will be able to say that you have seen Errol Spence lose a fight at least once already. Thus, seeing it again is entirely possible and plausible. It doesn't have the same fire, the same intrigue. By that time, Danny will have absconded to 154, taking a Terrence Crawford fight at welterweight off the table. This is boxing, folks. Anything could happen, which means it could very well happen this way.
I wouldn't be surprised.